What is up, YouTube? Today we have TierZoo. It's about centipedes, y'all. Centipedes. How OP is centipedes? Well, I don't know, but my man's TierZoo right here is gonna explain how OP are they. Are they really that OP? I guess some are poisonous. Maybe they're like really big centipedes. I don't know how big they can get. Boy, that shit creepy as hell. Them boys creepy as hell.
Centipedes are
The only centipede I like is the one from Pokemon. What is that? That's that shit from Resident Evil.
Were the first builds to ever unlock the ability to breathe air, way back during the
Wait, what?
Silurian expansion. They're also one of the oldest. Without a doubt, one of the.
Hold up. My fault. Let me listen to what he got to say. How y'all doing today, though? It's been a while.
Centipedes are without a doubt one of the most terrifying builds in the entire game. They're also one of the oldest. They're part of an ancient lineage called myriapods, which were the first builds to ever unlock the ability to breathe air, way back during the Silurian expansion.
Interesting.
Their many legs and venomous fangs make for a fearsome display for any player looking to challenge them in combat. But
That
has
shit
their
weird
ancient
as hell.
strategy held up in the face of the immense
Oh, they got two
the game
faces?
has seen? Is having dozens upon dozens of legs much of an improvement over just having a few? Let's take a closer look at the stats and abilities of centipedes
That
and
boy's
millipedes,
moving for real.
and ultimately decide where they fall on the tier list. First, let's take a look at their stats and abilities. And for this section, we'll show both the centipede and millipede base stats. Both centipedes and millipedes have solid
You don't show me
defensive
something
stats.
truly
They're both
disgusting.
part of the arthropod faction and inherit the.
Oops. Can I see the stats?
Millipedes have
See the
solid
stats.
defensive stats.
Okay. That defense crazy. Okay. I see.
They're both part of the arthropod faction and inherit the
They both
exoskeletal
stupid though.
armor build, granting them
And intelligent,
dramatically
low as
higher base
hell.
defense compared to similarly sized soft-bodied
Can't
invertebrates,
use no type of
such
magic.
as slugs or velvet worms. Their chitinous exoskeleton can deflect most basic attacks from players at or below their weight class. There is a meaningful difference between the two on this front, though. Millipedes have interlocking articulated plates, leaving essentially zero gaps in their armor other than on the underside where all their leg joints are. Centipedes, on the other hand, do have gaps in their armor, particularly in between segments on their sides between their legs. Unlike millipedes, which have their leg joints attached on their underside, centipede leg joints are located on the side of the centipede, making these weak points much more difficult to defend. This results in a much higher defense
ants be
stat
jumping,
for
niggas.
millipedes.
For
But
real.
the trade-off is pretty obvious when you look at their other major difference, their mobility stat. Millipedes have a speed stat that is only slightly higher than that of a snail, which is incredibly low given that snails don't even have legs. Centipedes, with their less restrictive armor, are some of the quickest moving arthropods in the game, able to quickly weave in and around cover and scale walls in record time.
Oh!
Their quick
I knew that was
twitching
gonna
movement
happen.
makes them tough to pin down, and because of their flat shape, they have a very easy time running for cover if threatened by a player in a higher weight class. But of course, the primary reason they're invested in a higher movement speed is because it synergizes well with the last major
Yeah, that
difference
nigga had no
with
chance.
millipedes,
He
their
said,
power stat.
my time is up,
Millipedes
I'm gonna
have
take
no
it.
offensive moves at all. When confronted with an adversary, millipedes will respond by attempting to lock down their defenses even more tightly than they already are, in hopes that the aggressive player will simply give up. They'll curl up into a ball in order to guard their already small number of weak points, and may also begin secreting noxious and or toxic chemicals to dissuade persistent predators from risking poison damage. Centipedes may attempt to curl and take some hits, but more often than not, they'll opt to either flee or rely on their powerful offense to substitute for their lackluster defense. The centipede's jaws, which are really their two front legs, have been modified into hypodermic daggers,
Interesting.
able to pierce armor and inflict venom
Their
to deal
jaws are their
devastating
legs.
damage.
Dang, not the
rest of their
frog.
stats are pretty similar, as most myriapods sport fairly generic mid-level camo. Nothing too impressive, but enough to beat the average player's passive perception as long as they remain motionless. Both centipedes and millipedes sometimes
Yo, that's
exploit
kinda
vibrant
crazy.
cosmetic coloration as well,
That is
forgoing
weird.
stealth and replacing it with intimidation, flexing how toxic their poison or venom is. And as a fairly ancestral lineage of arthropods,
That's
it's
a
no
big
surprise
lizard
their
that's taken
intelligence
out.
stat is quite low, as they were introduced to the game during a time before intelligence builds were even remotely viable, and have
I hate
opted
looking
to
at this
refine
thing,
their
bro.
core strategy rather than respec into a higher intelligence build. Unfortunately, this locks them out of the higher level perception perks like binocular vision and compound
Bro, who's
eyes,
doing that?
forcing them to mainly rely on their
I'm
most
bothering that
basic
nigga.
options for detecting enemies, like simple eyes, chemoreception, and tremor sense. As far as other unique abilities go, myriapods don't have all that much. This is a little unfair because when they were first patched into the game, their most important unique ability was their ability to breathe on dry land. However, as the game's meta has progressed, air breathing has become one of the most common abilities in the game, making myriapods much less unique and honestly a bit obsolete. One other special ability they do have is auto-mimicry. It is quite difficult to tell at a glance which end of a centipede is the head, as their back end also looks almost identical. In fact, in some ways, the back end even functions as a head, as it also has highly sensitive structures similar to antennae.
Wait, don't some centipedes have 2 heads? Or is that like a myth? And they're just saying that just to like, I don't know.
The reason this matters is that the best way to disable and defeat a centipede is to attack its head first, before it has a chance to respond. If an attacking player has a 50% chance to accidentally attack the wrong end, that gives centipedes a chance to counterattack for massive damage, or escape. So those are the base stats and abilities of the myriapod. But how do these traits actually stack up against the current meta? While their stats seem solid at first glance, the game's power creep has severely limited their viability. Expansion after expansion, the devs have expanded access to the myriapod's formerly exclusive abilities, and introduced new abilities to the game which function as counterplay options against centipedes and millipedes, allowing newer builds to more efficiently exploit their weaknesses. For example, the introduction of the beak attribute dramatically improved the bird build's matchup against centipedes, as the disjointed hitbox makes the risk of a counterattack less of a concern. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's first discuss the centipede. The centipede's bite is one of the strongest in its weight class, enough to make some snake mains jealous. Compared against the power of a scorpion's sting, the bite has higher raw damage and armor-piercing potential, but weaker venom. By itself, this makes it one of the most formidable attacking moves in the entire arthropod faction. So with that in mind, the viability of the centipede really comes down to how reliable the rest of the centipede's game plan is at enabling the use
So there's some centipedes that can beat snakes.
Unfortunately, this is where the cracks start to show in this ancient build's game plan. When this move connects, the damage it deals is devastating, but landing a strike with the centipede's bite is easier said than done. For starters, while the centipede's base movement
What are like the
speed is
biggest
quite
creatures
solid,
that centipedes can
it
take
lacks
out?
the surprise
That's what I want
burst
to know.
mobility that so many predators rely on. Centipedes just sort of
Well, that
scurry
one
around,
centipede can
hoping
take
that they'll
out.
eventually catch their player off guard. But as long as you remain vigilant, centipede attacks are about as predictable and telegraphed as they come. Centipedes have
Also, do
low
centipedes
stealth
work
and make
together?
no attempts to conceal themselves.
They
as
probably
approach
do,
a
some
target.
centipedes.
So as long as your character's passive perception is halfway decent, you should have plenty of opportunity to react and escape before they get within striking range. Their poor vision also undermines their ability to pursue prey as they flee,
They got poor vision?
even though they easily have the speed to chase them down. The only mistake players commonly make is attempting to stand their ground and fight them off, rather than taking the easy way out and fleeing before they can deal any damage. In addition to their lack of ability to ambush, centipedes also have such a low intelligence stat that fairly rudimentary stealth tactics, things like basic camouflage and hiding behind partial cover, are highly effective against them, and can cause an aggressive centipede to completely miss their opportunity to attack as they run right past you.
They do got
It's
poor
worth
vision.
noting that one subclass of centipedes does have the compound eyes perk and also sports an even higher base movement speed, one of the fastest in the entire arthropod faction. But these centipedes, called house centipedes, have much lower damage output and defense stats, and mostly just prey on low-tier insects like silverfish and crickets. Even in their own niche of rush-down arthropod builds, centipedes have been power-crept by the Solifugid, also known as the sun spider or camel spider, which is significantly faster on foot, and although it isn't venomous, the
That
raw
was
damage this
smooth,
thing can
man.
put out absolutely shreds through anything caught in its path. The sun spider definitely deserves its own video though, so I'll save further analysis for later. Switching over
Wait,
to
did you already
millipedes,
make the video?
things still aren't great, but they do fare a bit better.
It did say 10
Millipedes
months
are
ago.
highly resistant to enemy attacks, there's no denying that. Few builds in the game are better equipped to tank a ton of hits from an onslaught of attackers. However, the millipede's main method of deterring predators, its toxin, is pretty underwhelming. It doesn't deal damage quick enough to really deter persistent predators, at least within the insect faction. Most arthropods have solid poison resistance.
Yo, these
stats,
niggas really
so these
working
types of
together,
toxins
bro.
tend to really
They made a
elevate
ladder and
defense against
everything.
bird, amphibian, and
Whole
rodent
entire
pests.
bridge.
If millipedes could spec into a more potent chemical defense, similar to the bombardier beetle, they might be a bit more dangerous to attack. But as it stands, assuming you can handle a small amount of poison damage, it can be worth it to continue attacking and fishing for a crit, because even the Millipede's armor isn't completely invincible. This weakness at least doesn't impede their primary objective, as even though they have just as terrible of eyesight as Centipedes, or potentially even worse in the case of some, this doesn't stop them from easily finding the moss and detritus that they need to live on. In addition, some Millipedes do opt for a different style of defense, with barbed bristles that are highly effective at deterring ants.
Yo, that boy
This is
got
less
armor.
effective against birds and rodents, but much better against other arthropods. So while both have counterplay, Millipedes have options when it comes to adapting to their local meta. One major area I think both Centipedes and Millipedes could improve in is making better use of their abundance of legs. Centipedes have only 2 modified pairs of limbs, their front legs, which have been modified into fangs, and their back legs, which have been modified into antennae. That still leaves several dozen other legs that they could probably afford to convert into more useful appendages. Having similar jaw-like legs on their back end would synergize well with their auto-mimicry ability, and make it so that there's no end you could attack safely. And for the Millipede, although they aren't as combat-focused, I think they would still benefit from speccing into some other utility options, like, for example, fossorial legs to allow them to dig underground. They have a lot of options, but right now, I genuinely think that myriapods are barely managing to do with dozens of legs what most arthropods do with
Cats can
only a
eat
few.
insects.
Ultimately,
can.
I do think both builds have been massively power-crept and cannot justify putting them any higher than the low tiers.
Do cats
Terrifying
actually eat
as the
rats?
centipede may be,
Or
I actually
mice?
think it fares even worse than the scorpion, given how simple
That's
and
true.
easily countered its game plan is once
Kinda
you know the
nuts.
matchup. They're going firmly in F tier. Millipedes do fare better for sure, as their tanky, toxic defensive strategy is tricky to overcome. But with the right strategy or with a significant size advantage, Millipedes present very little challenge. In addition, poisonous Millipedes suffer from their own success in that some higher intelligence builds, like lemurs and monkeys, actually deliberately trigger their toxic defense ability and then rub the toxin on their fur to gain a temporary bug repellent buff, before either discarding or eating
That boy's
the
smart.
So, while I think you could
Smart.
definitely make the argument that they at least make it out of F tier and belong
Smart.
in D tier, I don't think they belong any higher than that. Whether you want to play as a fast-moving damage dealer or a slow, toxic tank, there are much better options available to you than Centipedes or Millipedes. Myriapods simply have too many gaps in their defense, both in their physical armor and their game plan overall. You can be as careful as possible, but if your defenses have obvious exploits, you'll always be vulnerable. This is true not just for survival in the wilderness, but also for your personal data online. If you find yourself constantly barraged,
There'll be video. There'll be a little video from TierZoo here. He always moved with the ads though. I knew he was gonna jump right into an ad, but yo, W TierZoo. I hope y'all all enjoyed. Oh yeah, last video I said I was gonna maybe stop doing these outros and stuff because these are just like little videos I'm just posting and stuff, not big projects, But anyways, yeah, that's it. Peace.